Hello, I am Zinfogel. Alright, this is the Datamine right before anniversary, so it's gotta be good, right? This month we have 8 new simpers, and given the fairly large quantity here, this is going to be a two-part video. In this part, we're going to cover the scoutable simpers, so that includes Sidney, Signature Leon, Lear, and Falkner. And on the second part, we're going to do the freebies. I know it's a little weird to separate Lear from his henchmen, but I don't think they synergize too well to begin with, so this is mostly to categorize things. Well then, let's get started. First up is the King of Pasio, our boy Lear and Hoopa. And as of time of recording, I have a 1-5 copy of the guy, so I have a better grasp on his damage potential. But before discussing his metagame viability, I think we should skim through the kit. Lear is a Psychic type tech, so that gives him an inherent advantage over other sync pairs because he has the Psychic terrain multiplier, and he's more offensively oriented. Now, it's been months since we've had a proper Psychic type. The last one was Bianca and Musharna, November last year, and at this time, everybody has access to a fully gridded 5-5 2020 Giovanni, so Lear has some hefty competition here. Before addressing Lear's position in the metagame, we needed to skim through the kit. So, this guy is built as a striker. He's got a phenomenal offensive presence, counterbalanced with some squishy bulk, and average speed. And then we have a utility move, Snatch, the same one that Grimsley has. So what this does is it steals positive stat raises from the enemy. So if the enemy has +3 attack and +2 accuracy, then you take them away, and that's added to Lear's stat raises. And then we got the X special attack to help with your offense, Hyperspace Hole, which at the moment is the strongest Psychic type move in the game, though it's on the lower end for 4-bar moves, and it never misses. That's quite handy, especially for enemies that raise evasion. And then the turn move. This thing is really potent. So Lear's turn move comprises utility with some offensive setup. First off, it applies a shield that prevents stat drops on your side of the field. This is not very handy. There is some stages that use status moves, but more often than not, this happens when the enemy procs secondary effects with their moves, so it's kinda whatever. And then it also lowers the sync countdown by 1, that is really neat. Then it raises crit by 3 stages, so accounting for X special attack, Lear is offensively self-sufficient, and it also gives AoE regeneration to the party, which, as you probably know, I am a big fan of, because regeneration in this game behaves like a potion. When you finish your regeneration ticks, it's basically the same recovery rate, and it also gives you slower animations, which deceptively aids you with move gauge. Overall, this is a solid offensive kit already, and this sync countdown is a preamble to the rest of Lear's kit, because it's all focused around accelerating your sync. So you've got a head start 2, that's -2 sync countdown when you enter the fight. Propulsion 1 is a 20% chance of reducing the sync countdown even further, and Adrenaline 2 allows you to reduce the sync countdown by 2 when you use a sync move. So this sync acceleration rate is somewhat unprecedented. Normally, you have to use multiple sync pairs to accomplish this speed. For example, the combination of Signature Lessa plus Signature Cynthia. But Lear gives you a second round sync on his base kit. So there is no team in this game that doesn't appreciate getting a sync quicker. For example, you can get a sync nuke faster, or you can get a 6-star EX support buff even quicker. But as we will discuss in a bit, Lear is a very capable sync nuker, and he takes good advantage of accelerating the sync countdown on his own. And then we have the nuke. Lear's tech multiplier activates when the enemy doesn't have any stat raises. So this means that if the enemy has a random +1 attack buff, the multiplier shoots down, and Lear loses a lot of his nuke strength. This is meant to play off Snatch, because again, this steals stat raises, so you have to clear all the stat increases from your enemy by using Snatch, and then you can activate your nuke. And we need to make a parenthesis to talk about this, because this is the same tech multiplier that Bryson and Grimsley get, and I've used them extensively in the past. So the deal with this game is that enemies love buffing themselves all the time, and every trainer in this game has at least one trainer move that raises stats for every party member on the enemy side. And something that can happen is that, okay, I am going to use a Snatch to steal the enemy buffs, but then the next enemy applies another buff to the entire enemy team, and it forces you to waste time using a Snatch again so you can activate your nuke. But then the next enemy uses another set of party-wide buffs, and then the next enemy uses another set of party-wide buffs. So if you're nuking aggressively with Lear, there is a chance that the enemies will stop you from using your tech multiplier, and it can be really annoying. So in order to reliably activate the Lear's nuke, you kinda have to bring Bryson or Grimsley themselves, so they can haste/snatch the enemies before Lear launches his nuke, just to guarantee that a buff doesn't interrupt it. And it's in your best interests to maintain Lear's tech multiplier, because he loses a ton of his strength if the enemy manages to sneak a random buff in there. So, broadly speaking, Lear is a top tier striker. This combination of utility and offensive presence that can be augmented through psychic terrain is kind of unprecedented, and Lear is a terrifying force to be reckoned with. But the deal here is that a 1-5 Lear underperforms compared to Giovanni, sans the sync acceleration perks. So I don't think that you should bother with Lear unless you commit to the 3-5 full investment, because then Lear is a horrifying creature that melts stages. This is a little comparable to Champion Iris, where the 1-5 is solid and has a ton of utility, but the 3-5 is a completely different unit. Now, I don't think Lear is 1-5 and 2-5 grids are worth talking about, because you need the full grid to access all your tools, so Lear can put himself above Giovanni. And at this point, you have all your sinking tiles as well as Rising Tide, which is another sync multiplier derived from stat increases. The more stat increases you have, the more power you get. And when accounting for Psychic Terrain, Lear is now officially the strongest sync nuke in the game. It supersedes both Marnies as well as Champion Iris. And remember that you can have this nuke at the second round of a fight, so a 6-star EX 3-5 Lear can easily wipe a center with a minimal setup, because you just click a Snatch and you can have a Hilbert buff use, so you can increase a Rising Tide and buff a special attack through whatever means necessary, and Lear can easily melt an off-type champion stadium stage. The build I would recommend would be something like this. Go for all the sinking tiles possible, as well as Rising Tide, of course, and you got X special attack ramp up 1. This allows you to buff +3 special attack when using X special attack, so this allows for faster setup. And you also got Hyperspace Hole Furious Brain. It's a multiplier derived from special attack increases, so it's also cohesive and a really easy way to augment the Hyperspace Hole. And with this, I don't think you will have issues erasing stages ever, especially when Lear has such strong partners in Bianca, who is a very broken unit to begin with. There is the other utility to consider, like Snatch NPR, Rejuvenate 6, Soften Up 1 to land guaranteed crits, and Fast Track 2 to increase more stats for Rising Tide, but ultimately the focus here is on buffing Lear's sync nuke immediately so that you can erase stages ASAP. If you have Bianca and the 3-5 Lear, this guy is honestly on another level. An incredible unit that overperforms, amazing utility, amazing offensive presence, great DPS, great nukes, phenomenal roll compression. I cannot praise Lear enough. This guy is actually insane. But most people are skipping him because they already have Giovanni for Psychic type DPS. So, it really depends on how hard you want to overkill stages. And here we have Falkner and Swellow. Rest in peace, Noctowl. So, as a little anecdote, back in the day, we're talking about 2008 when I was still in high school. I used Falkner as my icon on forums because I thought he was the coolest guy ever, this little emo wannabe. So, I am probably going to do dailies on the guy because I just like his design. But Falkner is a flying type support with a kit custom made for the hyper offensive metagame we live in nowadays. He's phenomenal for a general pool sync pair. So let's go straight to the buffing kit. Falkner has Direct Heal Plus, which is fantastic. This means that he can quickly fix the offense of another sync pair, and his trigger move grants +2 attack, +2 special attack for the entire party, as well as speed stealth buff, which is helpful because Falkner has a relatively high speed stat for a support. Now, this combination puts Falkner in a similar tier to Ingo and Hilbert, who have an incredible buffing efficiency. They just fix a party's DPS almost immediately. It's a little less efficient with Falkner because he has to split his attention between crit buffs or attack/special attack buffs, and he can only buff +2 at a time. So you kinda want to pair this with a self-sufficient striker so they can get to their DPS a lot quicker. But Falkner is capable of fixing sync pairs who require full offensive support. We're talking about people like Wallace and Milotic, Signature Leaf, and Venusaur, units who are very powerful in their own right, but have a complete lack of offensive buffs. And I really like Falkner in this regard because it's also one of the very rare crit plus special attack buffers. Because think about it, the only units that can really do this are Omni buffers. So we have Signature Blue and Togepi, and then there is Signature Delesa, but I hate using Breathtaking for buffing crit. Then there is Sabrina, but she has to spend her healing to buff a special attack, which can be a little annoying. Torchic, and now I'm kind of running out of things to say. Lyra, I suppose, though she has to use her Signuk to activate Solarize for faster buffs. You know, it's complicated to get that package, and Falkner is a really easy way to get a special striker going. Anyway, Falkner has solid bulk, and this is 50 tier, but he's got horrid offensive stats. Wow, this was done in an attempt to nerf Fly, because it's a move with really high base power, but it has some interesting mechanics, and the rest of Falkner's kit is centered around it. So the way Fly works is that it's a 2-turn move. When you execute it, you enter a period of invulnerability, and you activate a timer automatically that forces you to land once it's done. But in this period, you dodge most moves, so you can prevent damage with that. But you also cannot execute any other actions. So it's not like you can enter Fly and then do whatever you want and be unkillable. No, it has timing tied to it. But Fly's biggest issue is that when you use it, you advance the sync countdown, but you don't advance it when you land. So this is an obstacle for a lot of strategies that attempt to reach a sync move on 9 turns of combat. Fly is going to prevent you from doing that. So if you understand how to time it and when is the correct time to use Fly, you can get a lot of value out of it because it allows you to straight dodge attacks. And you will know that I have used Nate and Braviary as a dodge tank in the past, and it's a perfectly viable strategy, especially with Falkner who has proper bulk. Now, all of Falkner's passives proc when you dodge an attack. You have Ridicule 4, that's a 50% chance of restoring 20% health when you dodge an attack. Fell Forward 1, recharges move gauge by 1 when you dodge an attack. Group/dash raises the speed for a party by 1 stage when you dodge an attack. So there is definitely an incentive on utilizing Fly, but you can still proc all of this if you raise Falkner's evasion with New Year's Lily, for example. So until you have the know-how on utilizing Fly, I would recommend that you stick with Air Slash instead, because it's still a really good crowd control tool. It's a 30% chance of making the target flinch, and you have an accuracy tile on the grid, as well as Air Slash Aggravation 1, so that enhances the chance of flinching from 30% to 60%, and it turns Swellow into a really reliable flincher, which is one of his greatest niches, honestly. As for Grid, Falkner continues the annoying trend of Pokefairs where he requires dupes to get his more important tools. But Wi-Fi Falkner is super solid. Like, this buffing kit is incredible and it nearly buries Torchica's viability. So Wi-Fi Falkner has nothing. 2-5 has Group Spectacle 9. When you dodge an attack, you raise accuracy for entire party, which can be very helpful depending on the striker you are pairing with Falkner, but it can also help Brutal Clarity users like Blue and Pidgeot. And you also got the Air Slash to help enable Harry 5 on 3-5 Pidgeot. And there is also a Quick Cure, it can be handy, and Air Slash accuracy +5. Now there is also some offensive tools. And you know I love my offensive support memes, but I am never going to do this with Falkner. The problem is the stats. This is just downright pathetic. It's not going to happen. If it does, it's going to be a Bad Mean Sunday video on a Flying Week stage. I don't see any other way to make it happen. And the full grid turns the utility up a notch. I think one of the most important tiles on Falkner's grid is Air Slash Aggravation 1, because as I mentioned earlier, it turns Swellow into a very reliable flincher, and it gives Falkner some utility after he's done with his buffing cycle. More specifically, this can enable Harry and Fall fighting users. There is some flying types with that. Blue and Pidgeot have Harry 5 on their 3-5 grid, and there is also Lysander. In case you don't remember, Lysander actually has a Harry 2 on his grid. This is one of his very few multipliers, and Falkner comprises a lot of the utility that Lysander is looking for, because Falkner can prevent the use of Lysander's turn move, because he tanks his defenses when he uses it, and he can also top off Lysander's special attack stat. So I would run a grid like this perhaps, just to keep Lysander's vampire roll active and enable the Harry 2 multiplier so Lysander can perform some beefier Oblivion Wings or Dark Pulses or whatever you are looking for. But the standard Swellow build I would run would be based around that. Just go for Air Slash Aggravation 1, Quick Tempo to enable a fast move gauge at the start of the fight, and also can help on permanent field effects on Champion Stadium, and also turn move Empire Fresh. You cannot really go wrong with a grid like that. And Falkner has a lot of syncing tools, which is a cohesive function when you have the 6-star EX support bonus, unlike most of the VP simpers who also have a lot of syncing passes, but you're kinda wasting your time using them. But for Falkner, you have Synchro Healing 1, so that's some recovery for a party when you sync, that is really nice. Sync Quickening 1, you can recharge a Fly when you use your sync move. And the other build I would run will be centered around the 6-star EX support bonus, so something like this. You can drop a Sync Quickening 1 if you don't care about Fly too much and go for a Group Spectacle 9, but this is also very much centered around using Fly over your flinching utility, but it will work well. I really like Falkner, and this is outside of my favoritism. If I get him, I am probably going for a 6-star EX support bonus right away, because this is a kind of unit that allows you to fix other ones, and his utility is quite good. Up next, we have Sidney Absol, a Mega Evolving Dark-type tech. And I am a little sad this is not a support, because I would have loved to complete the Hoenn Elite Four support quadfecta, but what can you do? So Sidney is an offensively oriented tech with a heavy focus on confusion and critting, and he's also got a potion for some roll compression. Sidney has solid offensive stats augmented by a Mega Evolution, though he's squishy for tech standards these days, but he behaves as a striker, so this doesn't matter too much. And his main moves are Night Slash and Brutal Swing, so you have your single target and your spread damage, but these are 2 bars and they are pathetically weak, even when full invested. Sidney has plenty of multipliers to augment his DPS, and he's also got some critical strike nodes on his grid. But you wanna know who has a better DPS than Sidney? Gosma. Fucking Gosma. The guy who has no Carter as his quote-unquote multiplier so he can hit 5-pin missiles, and Sidney somehow ends up lower than that. So DPS-wise, Sidney leaves a lot to be desired for today's standards, but his Sync Nuke is something else. Now, something I really like about Sidney is his turn move, because it turns him self-sufficient for the most part. You've got a +3 crit and Endure, so that's amazing to begin with. But this turn move consumes gauges, and it raises attack depending on the gauges consumed, so you can get up to +4 attack. And this turns Sidney into a proper striker for the most part. And besides that, you got the Sync move. It has a side effect. First off, you got Innate Soften Up 1, so that means that you always land crits with this, given the turn move. So Sidney has a completely reliable Sync nuke. You Mega Evolve, and the side effect is that it raises in power when the target is confused, which you can apply yourself because you have a Crit Confuse 9. So anytime you crit, you leave the target confused. This is a full A0 innate passive. So this is really good. You use buff with your turn move, you spread AoE confusion with Brutal Swing, crit everything, and you got your Sync multiplier set up right away. You have innate critical strike 3, but when you Mega Evolve, you get the critical strike 5, and you have innate stop hitting yourself 5. So this augments the chances that enemies will hit themselves in confusion, though I am not entirely certain on the rates, but I use this with Malo and Serena fairly often, and when you have it active, sides usually never attack you. They will hit themselves in confusion. So, while I lambasted Sidney's DPS, his Sync nuke is really scary, because it also benefits from all these critical strike passives, and the ease of setup is incredible. You buff, you click Brutal Swing, and you have your Sync multiplier spread through the entire enemy field. It's honestly terrifying. I don't think I really have to talk about the 1-5 and 2-5 grids, they have nothing. 2-5 has a Fuzzy Strike 2 for a Sync multiplier based off of confusion, and you have a ton of move gauge generation, so Sidney is also quite good on a dual strike team composition. But the full grid has some incredible Sync nuke potential. So let's talk about the nuke. If you go for all the sinking tiles, Crit Thrust of E5 and Fuzzy Strike 2, then Sidney has a better nuke than Getsis and Kyurem, than Summer Marnie, and slightly better than the Mask Royal. And need I remind you, those are some really high nuking thresholds. And Sidney here is just casually clicking Brutal Swing to set up his Sync multiplier, and he's already hitting that threshold of damage. It's honestly kind of insane. Instead of this, what you can do is drop a little bit of Sync nuking power, so you can go for Brutal Swing Critical Strike 5, so you have some DPS to speak of in case Sidney is your main striker. But again, I think the best focus of this kid is the Sync nuke. Besides that, Sidney has Pikachu is potion efficiency, so if you want him to, he can help the party out with some recovery, but it's honestly a waste of his potential when you can nuke and kill the stage before you need healing anyway. And he's also got some other utility. You go Super Desperate. This grants a super effective next when you are on critical HP, which you can set up with some taunting strategy, but Sidney's nuke is obscene already, so this is used for overkilling. You've got an Adrenaline 1, that's some good utility because Sidney wants to be nuking all the time. And First Aid 4 for some recovery, but Sidney can afford a turn to heal himself if necessary, so it's not really that helpful. As far as Sidney's metagame placement goes, he's a very selfish striker. Like, you can attempt to have Sidney assist other strikers, for example, Karna Houndoom, because she needs a Fall Fighting 5, and Sidney can spread that with his confusion. And he can also help Malo and Serena or Fall Acerola, but I think you are snaring the pace of the setup when Sidney himself is a very capable striker, and you can just bring some Lear bot or the Mask Royal for defense debuffs so Sidney can nuke even harder. This is a really easy striker to use. It's borderline brainless, and the potion utility also gives Sidney some amazing roll compression to guarantee precinct clears in Champion Stadium. This is excellent for a general pool character. Alright, I was trying to put this off as much as I could, but here we have Signature Leon Eternatus. First off, this guy looks like a stripper and I cannot take him seriously. Second, this is actually a take 2. I recorded my first impressions about the Signature Leon as a Simper, and I passed that analysis through some friends. And as I imagined, my interpretation of the Dynamax mechanics was horribly incorrect. But now that I have a much clearer picture on what Dynamax does, I can tell you how it affects Leon's viability. So Leon is a dragon type striker, and there is an abundance of simpers in this department. Between Signasus, Cynthia, and Lance, and the free-to-play ones like Zinnia, we don't have a need for this role. And it's something you will notice about Leon right away is that he has a below average special attack stat, and this gives him some issues when competing with other sources of dragon type damage. So, Signature Leon is a moveset that reminds me about the V and Sirfetch'd a little bit, because you have this potent 4-bar move backed up by 3 training moves. So there is some intent in shuffling here, but you don't ever need to do that with the correct setup. So Dynamax Cannon is your main offense. It is on the lower end of 4-bar moves, but it has a multiplier. Just like Behemoth Blade, when the enemy accrues a sync buff, you gain 50% more damage. And with the correct setup, Leon's Dynamax Cannon can surpass Lance's Hyper Beam in DPS, so it can be quite potent. But these days, fast clears is the most optimal way to perform a content. So unless you have a very defensive playstyle and wait for the enemy to sync, Leon is probably never seen this multiplier in action, so this really affects his DPS relative to other Dragon type strikers, where he has this wind up in order to deal his full damage potential, at which point you should have cleared a Champion Stadium stage to begin with. And then we have Dire Hit Plus. This pairs nicely with Sharp Entry 1 on Leon's grid, so you activate this and you can use Dire Hit Plus once, and Leon maximizes his critical hit rate, which hastens his setup. That is very good. And then a new training move, X Speed Plus, raises speed by 3 stages when used, which is meant to play off ramming speed. This is a passive that Leon has innately. When you raise your speed, you improve Dynamax Cannon's damage, and you also have inertia on Leon's grid, so you want to maximize his speed, and then the actual training move is quite interesting. Now, this training move has a couple uses. It drops the sync countdown by 1, so it helps in sync acceleration strategies, and it raises Leon's special attack by 3 stages. So Leon is offensively self-sufficient for the most part, though he does appreciate some support to set up quicker. And it also applies a super effective next, this is very important, and there is a bit of a handicap here. So this multiplier puts Leon in a similar tier to Maxi or N, who have this controllable super effective next, and it affects Syngnux. So remember that Leon is a striker role. When you raise him to his 6-star EX potential, you have an AoE Syngnux to work with, and you can really augment its potency with super effective next. And considering that Leon already has inertia for a Sync multiplier, this bursts of super effective damage allow Leon to catch up in DPS with other Dragon type strikers when his Dynamax Cannon is essentially nerfed on pre-sync clears. So given this array of qualities, Eternatus is perhaps the best way of clearing Dragon weak content, but outside of super effective contexts, Leon loses a lot of steam, and ramming speed helps his DPS a little bit, but he's like Gloria, where he has to wait for the enemy to use a sync move before he can dish out the truly potent damage. And that just delays the pace of a battle. Well, then there is the sync move. It doesn't have a side effect, but here we have a new passive, Lucky 7-4. It's a 50% chance whereby Eternatus can drop every stat on an enemy, everything except for critical hit rate. And this is good synergy for Dynamax Cannon because you drop special defense, so you can bump up your damage. But this also has good synergy with power-loving users, specifically Champion Iris and Hydreigon, which we're going to get to in a bit. But it's a good passive to have. And Max Damage Guard, which plays off of Leon's max move. So when you use a max move, it applies a damage guard next, and this is just like Emmett's buff when he uses his turn move, where you gain this shield that nullifies an instance of move damage, or it halves the power of a sync move, so it's a good way to keep Eternatus nice and healthy, and Ramming Speed, the BP multiplier we discussed earlier, based off of speed. But then we have the Dynamax mechanics. It turns out that absolutely Datamine the Dynamax tutorial, and I didn't ask for permission to display the footage, so you're just going to have to take my word for it, but I'm gonna link it in the description. And this little tutorial gives us a much more ample view on how Dynamax functions. So, in the main series games, when you Dynamax a Pokémon, you transform it, it gains a sizable HP boost, and you are allowed to use 3 max moves. In this game, it's nothing like that. Dynamax is essentially a glorified C move. You have it available at the very start of a fight, and you can use it once whenever you want. There are no seeming limitations. So you have this bomb with a similar power to a sync move that activates a myriad of passives. In the case of Eternatus, Dynamax Cannon becomes Eterna Beam. So when you use it, you recharge the move gauge in single player content, which allows you to use another strong attack right afterwards. But there is a lot of questions regarding Dynamax. How does it interact with other passives? Because we do have Ramming Speed and Hunter's Instinct, and right now we are assuming that Eterna Beam will not be affected by those. But is it affected by Critical Strike 2 as a lucky skill, or does it behave like a sync move and it's affected by inertia? These are questions that we cannot answer yet until we see Leon in action. I have a source that states that Ramming Speed doesn't affect Eterna Beam, and we can assume that all move multipliers probably won't affect it either. Most likely, it's considered a separate category from moves and sync moves. But at a minimum, Leon does have this insane shotgun attack that fixes a lot of his DPS issues. The way I would play Leon is bringing a support that can help him set up quicker, because he can maximize crit and special attack or speed, but you don't want to use Leon's turn move so you can get the super effective multiplier. So you can bring somebody like Skyla or Sabrina and then use his 6-star EX potential to erase sides, and then right afterwards use Eterna Beam to eviscerate center. And maybe Eterna Beam is also affected by super effective next, and that will make for a really funny screenshot. Ultimately, I am not sold on Signature Leon. He is really strong, and he can easily clear Dragon Weak content, and if you have the 6-star EX Leon, he can also off-type, no problem. But I also have my Signature Cynthia, which I am fine with, so I am not sure how to feel about this guy. Anyway, the 1-5 grid has nothing, the 2-5 grid has some defensive tools as well as NPRs for your turn moves, which kinda helps on Valley like climbing, and you have Hunter's Instinct, so if you have an easy way of enhancing this, like through Palentine's Arena for example, who can also buff speed for a party, then you might as well take it. It's more base power for Dynamax Cannon, so it helps. The full grid grants the real use. There is a Sharp Entry 1 to help with fast setup, and Eterna Beam plus 100 base power to really beef this up, and Inertia plus Sinking Tiles to help with the nuke. There is also Power Flux 3. So this is a 12% multiplier when accounting 4 bars, but a lot of Leon's skid is centered around nuking garbage and then launching Eterna Beam to end the stage. So Dynamax Cannon is not really a centerpiece on Leon's strategy. I would grab Power Flux 3 if you are doing a 3v9 though. And then some passives derived from Eterna Beam, and there is Max Sleep Up 1. When you use Eterna Beam, you drop the speed of the enemy team by 1 stage, which helps Hunter's Instinct, and you also have a Max Countdown 1. So when you use Eterna Beam, you drop the sync countdown by 1 stage, which functions like a pseudo-adrenaline. So I think the quote-unquote correct way of playing Signature Leon is abusing Eternabeam as well as his incredible Sync Nuke efficiency. So I would do something like this, go for Inertia, Sinking Tiles, Eternabeam plus 100 base power, Sharpen 3-1 to hasten crit buffs, and bring Skyla or Sabrina or whomever to finish up. Signature Leon is set up, and that would be a very easy clear. Given the role compression in this team composition already, you could afford a striking partner to hammer the DPS that Leon is missing. So you could bring Ingo plus Zinnia and Rayquaza, or perhaps Sabrina plus Lance, and that would yield an absurd amount of damage. And then I would also consider a half DPS build focused around Hunter's Instinct. This functions particularly well alongside the 3-5 champion Iris, who has a 3-pap on her grid, and she can debuff speed by -2 stages, and the combined pressure of Dragon Rush plus Eternabeam would be too much for a stage to handle. So it will work well, especially because Champion Iris can accelerate the move gauge and provide the means of spamming attacks. And Leon really benefits from type skill activation alongside Champion Iris, given his relatively low special attack stat, though when on his signature he loses his champion theme skill, which is unfortunate, but the combination is still quite good. But if you prefer Champion Iris as your Sync Nuker, then you can drop Sync potential so that you can focus on buffing Hunter's Instinct with Max Sleep Up 1, I suppose. Like, you always have the Eternabeam available, so it would be unwise to not launch it on every single match, so you might as well. But as a primary striker, I would focus on this grid, and I think it will work well. Hopefully I am interpreting the Dynamax mechanics correctly now, and this results in a proper assessment for Signature Leon. But I just don't feel a need for this unit in current metagame. We have plenty of very potent Dragon-type strikers, and if you have one invested already, you can afford to safely skip this unit. I don't see anything particularly special that Signature Leon accomplishes. But yeah, that's it for this guy and all the scoutable sync pairs in this Datamine. Next up will be the freebies, which include Sawyer and Rachel, so be on the lookout for a video if you are interested. Thank you for watching, take care, and I hope to see you another time.